Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar on the provision and use of work equipment regulations. I hope you're all having a good day and that you find this of interest. I'm going to be going through the regulations to give you an overview as to what they actually mean, what they are, and what you need to be doing to ensure that you have some form of compliance to them. So, my name is Alec Bryce, and I'll be your presenter for this morning. My co-hosts are Jason Reed and Jamie Thomas, and they will be able to answer any questions that you type into the toolbar that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. If for whatever reason we can't answer them today, we will get back to you in the early part of next week with any specific answers or requests or anything that you might have. The slides themselves are available by request. Again, just simply type in the question bar that you'd like a copy, and we will get those sent out to you. As always, there will be a recording of the webinar on the Pilz webinar channel, and that should appear Monday or Tuesday of next week. So, PUWER. Where does PUWER sit in the grand scheme of things? PUWER is an end user requirement, so nothing to do with people manufacturing machinery or anything like that, or putting it on the market where you would normally use the machinery directive or the supplier machinery safety regs if you were CE or UKCA marking a machine. PUWER sits in the user's environment, and it's the UK's legal implementation of the Use of Work Equipment Directive, or UWED. And basically, it's a set of regulations that you need to comply with to ensure that the equipment that you have is safe for use in the working environment. So there are 37 in total, and they're split into modules or chunks. And there is, you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen there is an approved code of practice, known as L22, which is a great resource that will give you a lot of information and guidance on the particular regulations themselves as well. Depending on the machinery that you are looking at and the type of equipment that it is, then PUWER can differ massively, and it can be sort of quite an onerous task to go through and inspect something, or if it's a very simple piece of equipment, it can be a relatively straightforward and quite quick task, but it will depend exactly on the type of equipment that you've got. So what is PUWER? PUWER stands for the Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations, and they initially came into force on the 5th of December 1998. It was originally known as PUWER 98 when it first came in. The main objective is to ensure the provision of safe work equipment throughout the lifetime of its use, regardless of its condition, age, or origin. So we're looking at all aspects of use. So it will be normal operating modes, clean mode, setup mode, wash down, whatever it might be. Every part of the use of the equipment throughout its whole lifetime needs to be considered. They set out the requirements that ensure that any machinery provided for use at work is suitable for its intended use, safe for use, including keeping it maintained in a safe condition, used only by people who have received adequate training, instructions and information, accompanied by suitable health and safety measures such as protective controls and devices, so guards, interlocks, emergency stops, safety circuits, etc., and used in accordance with the specific requirements for mobile equipment and power presses. You will see later on in the presentation that there are specific sets of regulations for both mobile work equipment and for power presses. As I mentioned, the approved code of practice, L22, is there, and it basically states that Regulation 3, as you'll see when we talk a little bit about it, it states that the duties or responsibilities are for employers, self-employed, and people who are controlling work equipment. So it's all encompassing, basically. There are levels of inspection and things that are needed to be compliant with PUWER, and the person or people that do that inspection need to be able to understand what the inspection should include. So what machinery is required to be inspected, how it should be done, and what measures are needed to implement the inspection, and when it should be carried out. The inspector needs to have sufficient experience and knowledge to identify what needs to be inspected, as we've said, and also to be able to detect any damage or faults resulting from deterioration or age or poor maintenance or whatever it might be, or damage that's been caused by a malfunction or something like that. They also need to do any particular tests and things that might be needed on it to ensure that it's working safely and it's structurally sound. So they need to have sound knowledge of the work equipment, so they know what to look at. So what key components do they need to review and test? What to look for? So how should a system react to be able to find any faults that come up within the system, or ensure that the system is capable of detecting faults? And to know what to do. So how do they report the faults? They make a report and a record of what they've actually inspected, but how do they then send that on to the people that they need to report it to, so that actions and things can be carried out to make any remedial measures and things that might be required? Most importantly, the inspector needs to be competent enough to carry out a proper, thorough and safe inspection. So obviously we don't want somebody be doing a work equipment safety inspection to be putting themselves into a dangerous situation to check something on the particular machine, for example. So when should we do a PUWER inspection? Well, there are two key trigger points, basically. The first being when it's first installed and before it's put into service for the first time. So at the end of a site acceptance test for new machinery, for example, is an ideal point to do that, because the machine's fully functional and just about ready to hand over into production. Or if it's been moved or relocated to a new site or location within the existing site. So it might be that the equipment previously was in a corner of a factory, and the physical walls along the two sides of the machine perhaps were used as the guards. But if we suddenly move that into the middle of the factory floor, then obviously we've got two open sides, and therefore we might have access to dangerous moving parts or things being ejected for the machine or whatever it may be. So we need to ensure that if it is moved, it's still fully compliant with the requirements. But also taking into account the machine itself, it may be that it's exposed to conditions that will cause deterioration. Here in the UK, it's quite a rainy environment, so if the machinery is outside, then we need to check periodically for rust and things like this and what have you that might be there because of the environment that the machine's in. Or it might be that there's been exceptional circumstances that have occurred. It may be that there's been a malfunction on the machine and it may have caused certain issues where maybe the machine's been deformed in some way, or there's been a flood and there's been water got into the machine, or a forklift truck's driven into some of the perimeter fencing or something like that. So there could be various other issues around that that will cause the need for an inspection to be done. So as I said, the regulations themselves are split into sections. There are 6 sections in total. Section 1 looks at the commencement, application, interpretation of the regulations. Section 2 is the management issues, so relating to ensuring the suitability of the work equipment for the job it has to do, looking at maintenance, so both planned preventative and routine maintenance, training, and so on. So there's quite a number of management regs and things in section 2. Section 3 looks at control issues, so it mainly covers things like guarding, controls for starting and stopping. There's a bit more on maintenance and so on. Section 4 looks specifically at mobile work equipment. Section 5 looks at power presses, basically amends and repeals the power press of 1965 regs and the full amendment in 1972. And section 6 basically is the bit where nothing else fits. It used to be termed as miscellaneous, but there are only a couple of simple regulations in there that you will see when we come through to that point of the presentation. So, regulations 1 to 3, the interpretation. So, if we look at regulation 1, that is literally what is the name, what date does it commence, what does it cover, intended use, and that sort of thing. Regulation 2, excuse me, regulation 2 looks at the interpretation and says that it should not give rise to risks to health and safety, irrespective of its age or place of origin. And work equipment covers just about anything that is used, equipment in the workplace. So it could be anything from a hand tool to a complete process line, and excuse me, and it also covers second-hand, hired and leased equipment. Regulation 3 looks at duties for people that need to ensure compliance with PUWER, and the requirements apply to such equipment provided for use or used by an employee at work. They also will apply to a self-employed person in respect of the equipment that they're using, and also any person who has control to any extent of work equipment, or a person using or supervising somebody using work equipment, or indeed the way in which work equipment is used. So it's all encompassing in its actual application. Regulations 4 to 10. So this is, as we said, looking at the management issues and things with regard to suitability, maintenance, training, etc. And Regulation 4 looks at the suitability of work equipment. So every employer shall ensure that work equipment is constructed or adapted to be suitable for its use, and for the purpose for which it will be used. Regulation 5 covers maintenance, and it builds basically on the requirements from the general duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act. It talks about frequency of maintenance, and states that a fault in a safety critical system could remain undetected unless appropriate safety checks are included in the maintenance routines. How often these checks are carried out will basically depend on the machine itself and how often it's used, the environment, as it's saying. I've said, you know, is it in a wet environment or a clean area or something like that. It might be the variety of operations. So the machine could be a multifunction machine and can actually conduct a different number of tasks. And also to the risk to the health and safety from any failure or malfunction of the machine. There's nothing that says you have to keep a maintenance log, although for high-risk equipment, it is recommended that a log is kept, and if there is one, it must be kept up to date. For safety-critical parts where failures could lead to immediate or hidden potential risks, then formal systems based on things like planned preventative maintenance, so replacing parts or making adjustments at set intervals to avoid risks or deterioration or failure of equipment, but also in relation to condition-based maintenance, so monitoring the condition of it to ensure that it's still suitable to carry out its intended use. If anything is hired by, so something that's supplied by a third party and it's brought in for hire, then it's important to work out and understand with both the person or the company that's hiring the equipment and the company that hires it out. You need to really establish between the two who's going to carry out the safety related maintenance. And the maintenance should only be done by people who are competent and trained in doing that particular maintenance. Regulation 6 looks at inspection. As we've said, that it should be inspected after installation and before being put into service for the first time, or if it's been moved, or there may have been an exceptional circumstance, or again, at suitable intervals deemed necessary from the machine itself. So this could be different, again, depending on each machine and the environment and everything that it's in. We need to look at the potential risks from the work equipment, and again, what we need to look at from physical checks, functional checks, visual checks, and things like that. We need to inspect the safety related parts necessary for the safe operation. So overload warning devices, limit switches, functional tests may be necessary to check the safety related parts. So interlocks, protection devices, safety controls, etc., are all working as intended. So all of these findings, when we do the inspections, need to be recorded. And that physical evidence is to help the user check easily if it's been inspected, when it was inspected, and a link to the results to know that it's actually all right or it's not all right. So there's all sorts of various bits that need to be included within part of the inspection itself. Regulation 7 looks at specific risks. So we've got to not only take into account just the general use of the equipment, but also to think about things like the general risk to health of the workers from manual handling, any dust, fumes, noise, hand-arm vibration, etc. And again, need to ensure that we cover all of these aspects that's in there. We need to also ensure that wherever possible, the risks are controlled by the normal hierarchical three-step risk reduction method. So we would eliminate the risks wherever possible. If not possible, depending on what it is, we need to take engineering or physical measures to control the risks. So provision of guards or control devices and that sort of thing. And then only as a last resort, we're into PPE, SOPs and that sort of thing, and providing extra information and training for the work equipment itself. Regulation 8 looks at information and instructions. So we need to know how to use the equipment, how not to use it, what to do should any foreseeable abnormal situation occur. And it's got to be easily comprehensible and readily understood by everybody. So we also need to ensure that supervisors and managers should have the information and written instructions provided, so that they can ensure that the people working under them are actually doing so in a safe and controlled manner. A lot of that is covered by training, which is in Regulation 9. So we need to look at adequate training, which will vary depending on the job or the activity and the work equipment itself. You need to determine the existing level of competence and provide training where it's necessary. So we look at the existing competence, and we might need to also take into account that people are temporary workers, maybe supplied by an agency, who are going to be operating the equipment. So we need to look at the people who are managing or supervising that, as I've said, and train them to make up any shortfall of that competence and the knowledge required to work the equipment suitably, sufficiently and safely. We need to think about providing refresher training where that might be necessary, because obviously we know that skills can decline if they're not used on a regular basis. So it may be that after a lengthy period of absence from work, or if a worker is moved on to a piece of work equipment to cover for somebody, maybe occasionally because they're on holiday or something like that, then they need to ensure that because they're not using it on a regular basis, some refresher training on how to use the equipment, how not to use it, etc., is undertaken. Regulation 10, the last one in this section 2, looks at conformity with community requirements. So, for example, if we look at supply machinery safety regs, is there a UKCA mark on there, or is the machinery directive applicable and there's a CE mark or something like that? So normally this would be on a plate affixed onto the machine so that you can check if there is that available, and whether there's a declaration of conformity that you can look at to see which standards and things have been applied to the machine. But I will stress it's always key to remember that just because there is one of these CE or UKCA marks on the machine, it doesn't always guarantee that the work equipment is safe. That's why we will do a PUWER inspection to make sure that it is safe for people to use in the environment that it's in. So if we look at section 3, Regulations 11 to 24, this looks at control issues, things like guarding, starting, stopping, etc., as we've said. And Regulation 11 looks at dangerous parts of machinery. A very, very key aspect here is that the person that's looking at this needs to have a very good working knowledge of the machinery and all of the applicable standards. So we need to ensure that we can prevent access to dangerous parts. We can stop the movement of any dangerous parts before somebody gets into a danger area. We need to ensure that the guards that are implemented don't give any increased risk to health and safety. They can't be easily bypassed or disabled, and they're at a suitable distance away from the danger zone. So things like the positioning of light curtains, scanners, sensors, etc., to ensure that the equipment can be brought to a safe state when those devices have been activated. So, as I've said, you really need a good working knowledge of these standards, and they will be along the lines of, for example, EN 14120, which will give guidance on designing and implementing guarding. It could be EN 14119, which is guidance on the interlocks for the guards, which is something that we covered in our last webinar. It may be 13857, so the distances and sizing of the guarding and the holes that you might have in the mesh or slots for feeding or ejecting pieces out of the equipment. EN 13855, so looking at safety distances and stopping times for your light curtains, scanners, etc. It could be 62046, which again looks at periodic testing and inspection of the light curtain devices and things like that. But another key one will be 13849, which again will, is something that we'll come on to a little bit in Regulation 18. So we need to look at the fixed guards and enclosing every dangerous part where it's practical to do so, or we'll have an interlock guard or an adjustable guard, and then we're down to jigs, holders, push sticks, that sort of thing. So that 3-step hierarchical measure again to ensure that it is compliant, but also providing suitable information, instructions, training, supervision, etc., as is required for the particular machine. So Regulation 11 really is a key important one, and a high knowledge of how the standards should be referred to and implemented is very much key in ensuring compliance with Regulation 11. Regulation 12 looks at protection against specific hazards. So the measures shall be other than personal protective equipment or information, instruction, training, etc. And it should include, where we can, appropriate measures to minimise the effects of the hazard as well to reduce the likelihood of it occurring. So we've got to consider things that may be falling or ejected from the machine, any rupture or disintegration of pipes, hoses, etc. Anything that may catch fire or overheat if it's in a hot environment. Any unintended premature discharge of things like gas, dust, liquids, that sort of thing out into the atmosphere, and anything that may potentially explode by the work equipment itself or any article it is producing, using, or storing. So there's quite a lot again to take into account within Regulation 12. Regulation 13 looks at high and low temperature and is basically concerned with burns, scalds and sears through contact with touchable surfaces. So here we are looking at an engineered solution to apply protective measures. So we could reduce the risk from contact by insulation, shielding, barricades or guarding so that you can't physically touch the or come into contact with the surfaces. If we've got any risks and things from hot process materials, so we need to look at issues of coming to contact, splashing, spillage, etc. So, can we limit the maximum temperature? Can we limit the levels in the machinery or the work equipment? Can we avoid any indirect steam or heating methods and things that are on there? So could we provide some sort of doors, lids, covers and the like to avoid any issues and things there? But again, it's engineered solutions that is really the thing that we should be looking for in compliance with Regulation 13. Regulation 14 looks at controls for making a significant change in operating conditions. So unless the equipment is in automatic mode, there needs to be a deliberate action on the controls for the purpose of starting the work equipment, which will include any restart after it's been stopped to clear a blockage or during a coffee break or whatever it might be, or a shift change or something like that. And it includes things for controlling the changes in speed, pressure, and other operating conditions where there may be a change in the result to the risks of health and safety, which is greater or different to what it was during its last operating mode. One thing that I'll also like to point out here with regards to this is that the new machinery regulation that comes fully into force on the 20th of January 2027, that includes the requirements and considerations on security control of who can and who cannot change the mode of a machine. So again, that's something that would need to be considered and looked at from ensuring that you don't allow people who aren't competent, trained, or have the knowledge to be able to change the modes and things of a machine. And again, measures will certainly need to be implemented in the future once the machinery regulation has fully repealed the existing machinery directive. Regulation 15 looks at stop controls, and it says that the stop control shall bring the work equipment to a complete stop where necessary for reasons of health and safety. So there needs to be a means of stopping a machine doing its process or its function or whatever it might be. That, if necessary, will also switch off all sources of energy after stopping the work equipment. So it may cut the power, it may dump the air, for example. It may use blocking valves so that we don't get any trapped air in the system that's leaking and cause anything to move or anything like that. And it will work in priority to any other control device. One key issue that is a functional check and test that can be done during the inspection will be to press and hold the stop button and then press the start button to ensure that it doesn't actually start. So the ensuring that that stop button overrides the start control. Regulation 16 looks at emergency stop controls. So an emergency stop control should be provided where the other safeguards in place are not adequate to prevent any risk or for when an irregular event occurs. But it shouldn't be considered as a substitute or anything like that for safeguarding. It shall have priority over any other control that's provided, including the stop control, as we spoke about in Regulation 15 just a moment ago. It should be easily reached and actuated, and it should be provided at every control point and every other appropriate locations around the equipment where personnel are going to be. Again, here we need to have a good working knowledge of the applicable standards. So 13850 being the key one for emergency stops, but to have a good working knowledge of that to ensure that what we've got is implemented correctly and at the right positions, and the type of device that's installed, etc., is right and fit for purpose. Regulation 17 looks at controls in general and states that they've got to be clearly visible and identifiable. So make sure all the buttons, lamps, legends, etc. are all there and fitted. They must be able to be operated from a safe space, because we don't want to be having to put an operator in a dangerous situation. And where required, there needs to be a consideration for pre-start alarms. So it could be some form of audio visual alarm to allow people to either make sure they're out of a danger area, or that they can then take control of an emergency stop device or something like that to stop the machine from starting. Regulation 18 looks at control systems. And again, here I can't stress enough a good working knowledge of the standards, specifically things like 13849, 62061, 60204, very much key standards used in the definition of that. And we need to ensure that the control circuits are safe, in that they will be chosen making allowances for failures, faults, constraints, etc. So it needs to make sure that, as far as is reasonably practicable, any fault in or damage to or any part of a control system, or the loss of supply of any energy source, cannot result in additional or increased risk to health and safety. So the measures should be taken in the design and application of the control system to mitigate these effects, and to ensure that its failure can be balanced against the consequences of what might happen. So obviously, the greater the risk, the more resilient the control system needs to be. Again, an important point to think about and consider is the requirements in the new machinery regulation that talks about security from an IT point of view. So in relation to prevention of any corruption via a cyber attack or unintentional software mods by somebody sticking a USB stick into a machine locally or something like that. So again, good working knowledge of the standards that are there and control of the only competent persons to be able to make sure that any changes to that control system can be done in a safe and controlled manner. Regulation 19 is the isolation from sources of energy. So we need to ensure that, where appropriate, the work equipment has a means to isolate it from all sources of energy. It must be clearly identifiable. So we need to know what isolator performs what function. What is it actually switching off? Is it just local power? Is it old power, or whatever it might be? It needs to be readily accessible, so easy to get to and to be able to activate. And we also need to ensure that any reconnection of an energy source does not expose persons using it to any risk to health and safety. So, for example, we might have RCDs included in there, so that any sudden power failure or power surge or something like that is going to be detected, and that we'd have to use some form of reset function to actually get it to run again once that energy source has been restored. Regulation 20 looks at stability, and we need to ensure that obviously machines are bolted down or clamped efficiently. If we have scaffolding or anything like that, then where necessary, again, it has some form of outrigger or stabilizers and things that's on there. And any mobile work equipment, things that can be moved around or anything like that, should have the facility to be able to make it stable before it's actually put into use. 21 looks at lighting. So again, it needs to be suitable and sufficient and adequate for the task that's being carried out. And it should be regularly checked to ensure that its intensity hasn't diminished. And you need to make sure it's cleaned and maintained at regular intervals so that it's fully operational. 22 looks at maintenance. So an expansion of what was in Regulation 5, the management side of it. But here it talks about the fact that it must be constructed or adapted so as far as is reasonably practicable, that maintenance can be carried out without any risk to health and safety. And that also, wherever possible, it can be shut down so that we don't have any risk. So, or LOTO, as it's commonly known, is a good thing to look at having it implemented here. Again, we need to ensure that we follow the recommended maintenance schedules as provided by the equipment manufacturer. We need to look if we have issues and things that are still a potential risk, that we can put measures in place to control that. So it might be that we have functions that we can put in along the lines of providing temporary guards or limited movement controls, so dead man's handle, that sort of thing, crawl speed, hold to run devices, and so on. Or even, you know, if we're sort of setting up high power lasers and things like that, that we can use a second low power laser to allow the maintenance and the alignment and setup and things like that of the particular systems, so that the risk is reduced as far as is reasonably practicable. Regulation 23 looks at markings, and it includes things like start, stop, operating controls. So the people using the work equipment know exactly what each button, function, switch, or guard, or whatever it might be, actually does on a piece of work equipment. We need to ensure that we have notification of the maximum speeds for things like grinding wheels, that we provide the maximum load for work equipment, so that we know that we can adequately use the right equipment for the right weights that we're lifting. And also, you know, things like simple things like numbering machines. So if the isolators aren't located right next to the machine, that we have a number of them that are numbered, and we know what number relates to which machine, so we can operate the correct one. It may be that we have pipe work up and down around a machine. Easy thing to do with this is to colour code it and know what the colours mean. So we might have different pipes for air, water, or any waste or anything like that that's coming off the machine or the process that's being used. Regulation 24 looks at warning and warning devices. So we should have the warning devices where appropriate for reasons of health and safety. They need to be unambiguous, easily perceived and easily understood. And there are set pictograms, shall we say, that show the need for ear defenders, eye protection, high vis, etc., depending upon what might be there. And this is normally something that is going to reinforce the information that's been given, the instructions that are there, and the training that has been provided to the operator. They can be attached permanently. They can be temporary if it's only something that needs to be highlighted when maintenance is being carried out. And as I said, there are internationally recognised signs, symbols, etc., that can be used to ensure that anybody can easily see and easily understand any warnings about residual risks on the work equipment itself. So moving on to section 4, that looks at mobile work equipment. Now, Regulation 25 is the first one of these here, and it looks at ensuring that the risks to the operator and other workers due to this mobile equipment, where it may be travelling, for example, are controlled. Workers need to be protected against anything falling or any of the wheels and tracks and things like that. So we need to give consideration to things like seating, to cabs and operator stations, any work platforms and such. As I said, any falling objects and things like that need to have some sort of structure to help from there. Restraining systems, so seat belts, harnesses, that sort of thing. Any speed adjustment that can be put in there. And again, sort of typical guards and barriers around the likes of wheels and tracks, etc. Regulation 26 looks at ROPs, as they're commonly known, so rolling over protective structures. So where there's a risk of anyone being carried by mobile equipment, being crushed by it rolling over, then employees need to ensure that it has a suitable restraining system. So here we're looking at things specifically about applications for forklift trucks and their sort of structures, where we need to ensure that we have adequate provision for stabilisation, the rollover protective structure, so there's a frame that sits around the cab or the operator's position, and again, restraining systems like seat belts, etc. 27 again looks at overturning, and specifically with reference to forklift trucks, or LTs as they are referred to in there, and expands on the requirements which effectively protect seated operators from being crushed between the LT and the ground or the floor in the event of a rollover. So we need to again pay particular attention to where there may be any rough terrain or variable reach trucks and things like that that are in there. So again, just an expansion on what is covered within Regulation 26. Regulation 28 looks at self-propelled work equipment. So we need to ensure here that where self-propelled work equipment may, whilst in motion, involve any risks, that we have the facility to prevent it being started by an unauthorised person. Again, think on to the new machinery regulation and operational technology security. So only having people who are authorised, trained, competent, etc. can start it. That it has appropriate facilities for minimising consequences of a collision. So where there's more than one item of rail-mounted equipment working in motion at the same time or something like that. It has a device for braking and stopping it so that we can control the speed. Where safety constraints require emergency facilities operated by readily accessible controls or automatic systems are available for braking, that they remain functioning, and we need to look at what might happen should there be a failure in the main facility or something. Where a driver's direct field of vision is inadequate, so we can't see things, so do we need to have any mirrors or something like that fitted to it? If it's going to be used at night or in dark places, that there's suitable and sufficient lighting that's on there, or if it or anything carried or towed by it constitutes a fire hazard and it could endanger employees, then it must also carry the appropriate firefighting equipment if that firefighting equipment is not kept sufficiently close to it. Regulation 29 looks at remote controlled equipment, and here we may need to ensure that we have the inclusion of AGVs or AGRs, which are becoming AMRs, sorry, which are becoming more and more popular in the workplace. And here we need to ensure that where remote controlled self-propelled work equipment involves a risk to safety while it's in motion, that it should stop automatically once it leaves its control range, and where there is a risk of crushing or impact, it has some form of feature or guard against such risk unless you've got other devices that are in there that can stop it from doing so. We may also need to think about things like alarms, flashing lights, so that other people in the area of the mobile equipment are aware of its movement or its presence. And there are sensors on there to prevent contact with any people and things that might be in that same environment or come close to it. Regulation 30 looks at specifically at drive shafts. So where the seizure of a drive shaft between mobile work equipment and its accessories or anything towed by it is likely to involve risk, then we need to ensure that the work equipment as a means of preventing that seizure, or where we can't, then we try and avoid it as much as possible by, for example, if a drive shaft, whilst it becomes detached from the actual interchangeable device or something like that, if it could become soiled or damaged by contact with the ground whilst it's uncoupled, that we have some means of safeguarding that coupling to ensure the longevity of the shaft and that we don't have any seizure issues and things from it. Regulation 5, as I mentioned, looks specifically at power presses, and it basically repeals the power press regulations from 1965 and the 1972 amendments to ensure basically that safety levels are maintained. So we have the details here of what it applies to. So it's a mechanically driven press or a press brake that has a flywheel and clutch and are wholly or partly used to work metal. A power clutch in relation to a power press is a device that's designed to impart the movement of a flywheel to any tool when it's required. And we'll also need to consider that these applications or the regulations still apply whilst we are doing any die proving exercises. It doesn't apply to hydraulic presses or presses exempt from what we'll see in Reg 33 when we're talking about inspection of the guards and the devices. They may still need to be covered under the inspection requirements of the general duties under Regulation 6, which is the general inspection regulation. And again, the period between inspections for power presses is dictated by probably the guards and things that are fitted to it. So be it an enclosed guard, an interlock guard, an ARPD scanner or light curtain or something like that, which again, the good working knowledge of those standards and regulations will let you know that there are set periods for minimum or 6 or 12 months for ARPD devices that are fitted onto machinery. But in essence, there are the 5 regs as you see here. So 31 talks about what presses it applies to. 32 is thorough examination. 33 looks at inspection of guards and protective devices and states that every employer shall ensure that power presses is not used during setting or resetting or adjustment without trying out the tools first, including the die proving, unless every guard and protective device has been inspected and tested whilst in its position on the press by an appointed person who has the written permission, so permits to work and things like this, who is deemed to be and can prove competence, or that person is undergoing training for the purpose of acting under the immediate competent person, so they're being trained on how to do this for the future, or where we're looking at the guards and protection devices have not been altered or disturbed in the adjustment or the change of any tools or anything like that the press tool might have gone through. We'd also need to ensure that a power press is not used after the expiration of the 4th hour of a working period, unless its every guard and protection has been inspected and tested whilst in position on the press by a person appointed in writing, or there are automatic checks and things that can be done within that. So again, we're looking at persons who are competent, as certifications and proof of competence and so on, that they've got that there so that they can go on and conduct the tests as required and as stated within there if these tests aren't done on an automatic basis. Regulation 34 and 35 looks at the requirements for keeping records and the reports. So what type of reports do we need to do, and how long and where do we keep them for? And further information can be given in some of the ACOPs specifically for power presses, because these sections aren't included in the L22 ACOP. The ACOP that you do need and can use for referencing that will be L112 rather than L22 to give you that further guidance on the reports and the type of and keeping of them. Finally, we get down to the last section, section 6, which, as I said initially, was called miscellaneous, because these are for the little bits where things don't fall into any other section. There are only 2. Regulation 36 looks at exemptions, and this is where the Secretary of State for Defence can write an exemption certificate, because generally his staff, the armed forces, are typically using work equipment that is of a dangerous nature. So it's very difficult to cover those with PUWER. And Regulation 37 really doesn't apply anymore. It was just talking about a transitional time between the start in '98 and up until 2002, which is quite some time ago now, for the regulations around mobile work equipment. But that's long past. So that brings me to the end of the overview of the 37 PUWER regulations. As I've said, L22 is a fantastic resource. You can download that free from the HSE's website, and it will give you good practical advice on what the regulation actually means and how you need to be looking at implementing the right measures to ensure that your work equipment is safe and compliant with the regulations themselves. There is further help and advice available from Pilz. You have the options of talking to us about how we can help you with regards to our PUWER service, where we will come and inspect your work equipment for you. The reports themselves come in a bookmark PDF format, so it's easy to split them down into specific work areas or environments, or different types of work equipment. And again, you can drill down into each piece of work equipment. Where we find a non-compliance, we will do a risk evaluation. So we'll score it, so you'll get the level of risk, so be it very high or significant, whatever it might be, and also the risk type. So is it electrical, pneumatic, hydraulic, ergonomic, or whatever it might be, temperature rated, for example, that sort of thing that's there. All of that information is also exported into an Excel spreadsheet, which will make it really simple and easy to be used for prioritizing any remedial measures and so on, and keeping things up to date. As well as having the inspection services and things like that, we can help with details of remedial measures and things like that once we've identified the non-compliances. So things like full in-depth detailed risk assessments with things that might be, for example, CTAC specific standards for a certain type of machine, provision of safety concepts on how you can look at things to make it right with, again, design, and also CE and UKCA marking solutions. We have a wide and vast range of various training courses, including training more detailed on PUWER and on risk assessment that we can help you with, and the website will tell you just the details and things, and the course content for each of the courses we have on offer. There is also the webinar channel, so you can keep refreshed, or if you've missed a webinar in the past or something like that, you can keep your knowledge up to speed and up to date with things that are on there. Along things like 13855 for safe distances, 14119, which was interlocks, which was the last one, 13850 e-stops, safe use of machine maintenance and things like that, and everything that we've got there, and also some relevant ones for understanding safety and security with the upcoming changes in the new machinery regulation. You can also refer to the Pilz website, and if you see scroll down through the landing page, you'll see the top image there, where if you click on that, you can actually go in and see what's new in the way of safety products, what current market trends are there, any changes to any laws and standards and things. And if you click on the component systems and solutions sections, it will take you to a virtual machine or virtual production line, so you can look at how components can be installed and typical solutions for systems and things like that, and also download data sheets and such for more technical information on the particular product or the solution that's there. Well, that brings me to the end of this morning's webinar. I hope that you've found it of interest, and any questions that have been raised, hopefully Jason and Jamie have been able to answer those as we've gone through. If not, we will get back to you in the early part of next week. Nothing more really for me to say now, other than I wish you all a great weekend and look forward to seeing you on the next webinar from Pilz. Thank you and goodbye.